waxing lyrical, baby.
Delighted to be joined now by Josh, I'll get your name right eventually, Josh Norris of Rotoworld and NBC Sports. He's a draft writer and fantasy analyst. You can find him at Josh Norris. Josh, thanks very much for giving up your time to talk to us.
Absolutely. Anytime that I can jump overseas and do a podcast when it's the bill is on you, I am ready for it. I'm glad to do this in person.
Excellent. That's possibly the best answer we've ever been given to just to a greeting. I'll get straight into it. Obviously, you're a draft and a fantasy writer. How difficult can it be for you to temper expectations of rookies that you've spent the last few months singing the praises of? Have there been any notable rookies that you were so confident were going to come good in the first year that have burnt you horribly and now you must hate them forever?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. Luckily, since it happens so frequently, I've kind of learned to, rather than stay and die on a hill, I guess is the term that many people are saying now, I've learned to kind of accept and move on. Not necessarily, immediately. Some players take longer than others. But more so, I've noticed that it's, 2 to 3 years, and if you don't see at least flashes, then you just missed. And by that time, there are certainly many who aren't on an NFL team anymore. I will say this, Neil, that the fantasy element to my job is kind of new and fresh. Obviously, for a very long time, I've had favorites in terms of prospects and evaluations, and then sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But I think more so it's made me kind of introspective and evaluate my own process, not necessarily how I evaluate, but how I present what my opinions are. You might have noticed this because I know that we communicate a lot via Twitter, that I'm not quite as negative as I used to be. I'm kind of more positive than I used to be. And it's because, to kind of peel back the curtain here, I've realized that people remember more, the optimistic side of me would like to think so, when you talk highly of a player and he turns out to be good. They don't remember as often when you talk highly about a player and he doesn't turn out to be good. They really, really, really remember when you talk negatively about a player and he turns out to be great. And so I'm trying to avoid that last one and kind of talk about the players who I want to talk about and not necessarily criticize the ones because, I could talk equally as much about those. But it kind of goes back to the philosophy of, trying to find where a player succeeds and just talking about those aspects of his game.
See, I haven't written for that long, and plus I'm not that well known, that most of the rubbish I spout about people, they tend not to remember. Although my esteemed co-host does love to remind me of, this is a totally different sport, but cricketers that I've slagged off, who then go on to have illustrious careers. He takes great delight in reminding me of this, and almost to the point that I think he saves the text messages, and it's not just that I can't say, no, I think you've misremembered that. He will provide the evidence.
Everyone has to have a friend like that, to be perfectly honest. Someone to put you in your place, keep your head to the size that it should be. I wish mine could be a bit smaller than it is, but we're all born with some distractions, I guess.
Absolutely. Away from the fantasy element and focusing more on the draft, how soon after the last draft do you begin looking at the next year's class? So have you already began looking at 2018? And I mean, from what I'm hearing and reading, this is the greatest quarterback/running back class since the last time it was supposed to be. Is there anyone that has immediately, from what you've seen, caught your eye, or are you not that far on in the process?
Yeah. You know what, Neil? I don't mean to disappoint you, and I'm sure I will at some point during this, but I that has really changed for me in the last year and a half. I've realized, again, going back and evaluating myself, that so many opinions that I had during the off season turned out to be false or moot or just inaccurate, or some I wanted to take back by October, November, and especially December. So really what I'm doing now is just waiting until November and December to really dive into these prospects. Now, that will make November, December crazy hectic, but it saves me the thought of loving some prospects, not wanting to change my opinion because I believe in what I saw initially, whereas at the end, I can get the final year of these players and evaluate off of that. And I think that that's what's most important. That's what the NFL looks at most of all. An example for that is like Will Sutton in the past. I loved Will Sutton during his junior year at Arizona State. Then I think he tried to put on weight. It didn't really work out. He got a lot slower. He got injured during his final season, and he really hasn't amounted to anything in the NFL. Meanwhile, I had him like neck and neck with Aaron Donald throughout the entire season, and then obviously later on, I did have, I think, Donald slightly ahead by the end of it. But you know, if I was able to have fresh eyes on all that later on, I think it would have been pretty clear for me to not have that same opinion of Will Sutton. And there's plenty of those in the past. So to answer your question, no, I honestly have not watched a single draft prospect yet, which I feel great about, to be perfectly honest. Again, I go to the Senior Bowl, I go to the Shrine Game, and so that end of November, December, January territory is when I get really excited to dive back into these final year of college prospects.
I suppose as well to an extent that if you have someone who, say, has a wonderful like junior season and you fall in love with it and then they don't have as good a final season, you're almost forced to apologise for them for it. It's just like, I mean, one of the apps that we have at Rotoviz is like the Box Score Scout, where it compares, you know, loads of measurables for the players from a given year. If you look at Leonard Fournette's comps for this year, they're not that impressive. If you look at his comps for last year, I think his closest comparison is LaDainian Tomlinson. No, I'm not saying that if he'd been able to play last year, he'd have been LaDainian Tomlinson. But if someone would have seen that, and you're thinking, oh no, he's the next LT, and then every time Darius Geis is taking carries off him, it's this should be happening. No, it's all right. They're saving him.
There were a lot of those this year. I mean, Deshaun Kaiser was in a similar situation. It gives us, to me, just again, it's a fresher evaluation. You're not relying on your former opinion, because we all think, our eyes don't lie. But again, I think this goes back to each question that you've asked. It's pretty obvious that our eyes can lie, and we just don't know how to interpret what we're seeing, and we get things wrong. So, yeah, I'm right there with you.
Given, you say, the draft background, do you lean more towards playing yourself, not giving advice, playing redraft fantasy or dynasty, given that it's more of a long process?
Gosh, so I'm in a few dynasty leagues. Two. One was I just randomly stumbled upon this one on Twitter, and this was 4 or 5 years ago. There's 59-man rosters, 60-man rosters right now that I think get chopped down to 53. I mean, it's IDP, it's everything, It's craziness. It's craziness. And that's almost enough for me, but then I'm also in the Rotoworld and Friends League with a bunch of the Rotoworld guys and some other writers that have hopped on. I inherited that team from Rum for Johnny, so hopefully I can turn that one around. But in terms of dynasty, gosh, I'm not that interested right now in trying to. I mean, it's hard enough to guess who can succeed at the NFL level. That year to year, well, I would even say week to week. So year to year makes it even more difficult. And the more I do this, the more I realize fantasy really is a game of week to week. We always talk about, especially now, I mean, August and July are the times where we look back in the previous season and say, well, he finished as wide receiver 41, so he should be drafted in this area. Well, he might have only had, 3 weeks in the top 41, but just his overall average places him there. I mean, do you want to play a guy 12 weeks who finished, in just the top 3 in the top wide receiver 40s? That's kind of where the conversation comes to. And that's just from reading people. I mean, there are so many smart people in the fantasy community that I'm not saying that I regurgitate what they say, but I certainly like to pass it along and forward it along. Some very, very smart people out there. So to answer your question, what I'm really enjoying, honestly, Neil, are these best ball leagues, because drafting, obviously, is enjoyable. It's fun. I've entered about twice as many MFL 10s, these best ball leagues. I'm not even sure if you guys are allowed to. Are you allowed to join them overseas? Do you know?
Yes, yes, we're allowed.
are?
We're allowed. They haven't cottoned on to that yet. That we're playing it, we've still got a loop.
And I've just enjoyed those because, look, it's really just drafting the best team. There are 20 rounds. You get to take flyers on players like DeAndre Washington and Robert Turbin. Meanwhile, and in previous years, maybe a David Johnson in rounds 14 and rounds 15. Meanwhile, if you were doing a season-long one, David Johnson didn't help you out until the final, 6 weeks of the season during his rookie year. So you get to keep him on your roster in this type of an MFL, in this type of a league, other than, obviously, redraft season long. You don't want to keep a handcuff on your roster for the entire year. So if I had to pick one, Neil, it would be these best ball leagues. They're the most enjoyable for me.
That's it. My next question was going to be about best ball because obviously I see you do put out a lot of links to join them, and obviously on one of the Rotoworld podcasts you pod tracked the construction of your roster. Obviously it does present a very different approach to drafting as a whole because it is just, I've made this choice now, I am stuck with it, and whether that comes good or whether it blows up in my face, it's a hard concept to explain to. I mean, I say we are able to play it over here, but I know it's not as widely spread as it is in America, and it's some people have said, well, I don't see the appeal. It's like, well, you get all the fun done at the beginning, and then it's just you're sitting back and wait. It's the ultimate investment part of the game. I say, is it the fact that it is the best ball and it does take away some of the more head scratching decisions during the week? Is that part one of the things that appeals to you with it? Yeah,
it definitely is. I mean, look, I think I'm in 20 of them right now. I know Evan's in 130 or something like that. There are some people that are in 700 of them. I mean, if you asked us to week look at the waivers for each team, look at add drops, pickups, who to start, who's on bye weeks, all that kind of stuff. I mean, Neil, you know this. After 5 or even less than that, I mean, it gets crazy hectic. I can't even keep them straight, to be perfectly honest. There's a routine I go through. But with these, like you said, you draft, it's your knowledge, and it can go back, till right after the draft. They even draft before the draft, NFL draft, and up until, obviously, kickoff. I would say, and I would even say it's not even popular right now. Just the amount, it's a very, very small group that is interested in MFLs, and I feel bad because I talk about them so much. But I feel like it's one of those things that if you participate in one, you get the itch. It's easy to understand as soon as you do it that you want to enter more and more and more. And I mean, especially now with these 2X leagues that they have, that if you just enter $10 and you finish in the top half, you get your money back plus $10. I mean, it's very approachable. It's far easier than DFS, in my opinion. I've been trying DFS for the last few years, and I will give DFS advice, but I am by no means a DFS pro or even close to it. And so this is kind of my avenue to kind of scratch that itch, I guess. And finally, I will say this: if anyone ever invents an auction-style best ball league, to me, that would be the premier. Because even in best ball right now, and any redraft leagues that are snake, you don't have a chance to get every single player that you want. Obviously, in auction, you have a equal chance to get every single player that you want. And so for me, meanwhile, all my teams would look very, very similar, but auction best ball style would be very, very fun.
It was your birthday recently. Obviously, we wish you all the best. 21 again and all that. To go out of their way to get you an unusual present, your team, the Carolina Panthers, fired their GM.
Yeah.
So just the polite question: what the hell?
Yeah. Interesting, right? And especially bringing back Marty Herney, who made some questionable decisions in the past, but I think a big part of that was he was forced to in some ways, because I don't think he's mentioned very often when we talk about owners around the league, but when Jerry Richardson wants to have a heavy hand in something, Jerry Richardson has a heavy hand in something. And I mean, he's a former football player who is very engrossed in his relationships with players. I think, again, formerly playing in the NFL will do that to someone. And once the Charlotte Observer and some local writers and some national guys started discussing Thomas Davis and Greg Olson maybe not being as happy with the situation. That, to me, was kind of the last straw. Because if you look at this Panthers roster, and in the past 10 years, 5 years, or whatever, and you want to draw up some ideal Carolina Panthers, Thomas Davis and Greg Olson are probably two that would pop up for Jerry Richardson. One with Thomas Davis, I mean, just his persistence to even be on the field now is pretty crazy. And Greg Olson, in terms of all he has done in the Charlotte community, plus the relationship that Greg Olson and Jerry Richardson have because of Olson's son, who had some major medical issues. Greg Olson and his child were flown around the country to check out all the experts, all the specialists, to make sure his son was okay by Jerry Richardson. So again, and Neil, the bigger picture here is when owners fire any decision maker, almost always they go to the opposite end of the spectrum. Whether it's the offensive coach, offensive mastermind being fired, then they'll go and hire a defensive coach, someone who is loud and brash like a Rex Ryan. Instead, you go to a Todd Bowles. You know, we see this over and over and over again. Here, with Dave Gettleman, you get someone who was cutthroat a little bit, who made the difficult decisions because he wasn't as invested to some people on the roster as others, which I think is perfectly fine. And you have to do that. Meanwhile, you now go back to Marty Herney, who has comfort level with everyone in the building, plus someone who cried at Jake Delhomme or got choked up at Jake Delhomme's press conference when they finally cut him after some horrific games. Again, I think opposite ends of the spectrum, and I think that's just what we saw here.
I mean, just one thing that popped into my head. Imagine the Panthers had won the Super Bowl, which I'm sure you have, and Gettleman and Gettleman goes, does his thing, doesn't sign Josh Norman. They don't renegotiate with Davis. They don't have Olsen. I mean, basically what I'm saying is, if Gettleman acted like Belichick with a Super Bowl ring, would it have been? It probably wouldn't have been seen as that. It would have been smart move. But because they didn't win it, and then the last season was something of a disappointment, and he tries to be Belichick, it's a bit like, no, I'm terribly sorry. You haven't got the credit to do that.
Well, but I think a major difference is everyone in New England in that locker room buys in to exactly what the philosophy is because they've seen it have success in the past. I do think that season the team bought in, but then after it, little things popped up, and this is mostly a guess, but when splinters are there and you are involving the vocal leaders and veterans in the locker room in those splinters, then the locker room can have disconnect with the front office. And I think that causes them not to buy in. Plus, and this is a very, very small thing, but I always found it odd going back to January and February in those exit interviews. When Ron Rivera get up there week after week after week and talked about this team evolving, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, Dave Gettleman only does 2 press conferences all year. And the first one of the offseason, he gets up there and says, no, we don't need to evolve. That's the wrong term. Red flags, sirens went off. Because when I go back and look at all these teams' draft press conferences during the process after it's over, it's they're all brainwashed with slogans and mottos that they have, we want highly competitive, tough, blah, blah, blah. This is exactly what we want. You can tell that it was written on a board and they look at it every single day. For the single word that this team was producing from the coaching staff, and for the decision maker to immediately come up there and say, no, that's the wrong word, that often doesn't happen in the NFL. The timing was odd, but we will see what happens. And again, I understand why they did it from their perspective, but I can't say I agree with the move.
We've been fortunate to have on the podcast on several occasions your colleagues Ray Summerlin and Pat Doherty. Because they're not here and you are, I'm going to put you on the spot. For whatever reason, you've been tasked with providing the snarkiest blurb on a player that can be done. Do you go to Pat or do you go to Ray? And I can't promise that I won't tell them.
Wow. I don't know, man. When Christian Hackenberg was at Penn State, the college football section had some pretty snarky blurbs about him, and those were done by Thor Nystrom. So a little shout out to Thor. You know what? Okay, this offers. I don't know if you want this to be a shorter answer, but I have to go a longer one here because I think Pat Snark is like very upfront. And more like obvious humor is mixed in, references, maybe political stuff, so on and so forth. Ray is an interesting one because Ray has a great smile. He shows it often. But if you subtract that smile, you close your eyes, and you're only listening to his words, he throws major shade. And it's hidden, like I said, but it's behind that curtain that is, that friendly face. Ray has some darkness to him. And so if we wanted some dark humor, we wanted something deep that maybe you have to read it twice to finally get it, I think I would definitely go Ray there. But, for the more common blurb that is kind of a light jab, because I know that's what Pat would throw, he wouldn't really put much behind it, we'll go with Pat.
It's like what they said in Goodfellas, isn't it, regarding Ray? Was it killers come with smiles? So
there you go.
You think, he's got a big smiley face, he's going to, that's a lovely thing to say. Then you actually think about it, said, I've actually never been so insulted in my life.
Yep.
Speaking of Ray, I believe you and he have a mutual appreciation, if that's the right word, for Aston Villa. Is there a special reason?
It's gone beyond that, man. Like, it's kind of a sickness, to be honest.
I was going to say, is there a special reason that you chose Villa, or is it just because you believe sport should be endured and not enjoyed?
Okay, so I moved up to Stamford, Connecticut. Well, Norwalk, Connecticut, but I work in Stamford about 5 years ago. And right when I moved up here, it was the first season of NBC Sports getting the Premier League rights for the U.S. And it was a big deal, I mean, they did ad campaigns. More and more people started watching. They streamed every single game. And so I always have this idea in my head of like when I pick a team like this, I had a chance to pick any team here, any club, Neil. But I polled Twitter. I said, look, I don't want one of the top teams, I want one of these teams that is emerging, that has some young talent that might be able to get up there. And at the time, they were not coming off a spectacular season, but it was coming off a strong finish, I believe. And Christian Benteke was supposed to be like the next big thing. And I was like, wow, all right, I'm in. Love the colors. And I went with it. And then it was 2 disastrous seasons. And now you know where they are. However, I have not wavered. Not once. Ever. And this is nuts, I don't even do this with like football. I would say like my biggest fandom right now is with Villa. Because we don't get all the, and I don't even think all the games are viewable over there for y'all. I listen to the radio calls of every single match. Like, it's crazy. I would pay whatever it is, $12 a month to the horrible service that is AVTV and listen to these radio calls and just the most homer calls ever. And yeah, who knows what happened this year. But I have my favorites of like obviously middling talents. I'm going on and on here, but like for some reason I'm a big fan of Leandro Bacuna, and we know he's not that good. But I will say that the god himself, Jonathan Kadja, will, once he returns, I'm excited for this year. We'll see what happens, but I know more about this club in the last 5 years than I was really expecting to really invest myself into the sport where I really obviously never had a club.
See, you've say 5 years, but you're making all the right noises that every English football fan makes at this time of year. It's always our year.
Optimistic, positive.
And then by October, people are reaching for, the Valium and Effin and Jeff and, their wives because they come home and there's no dog to kick after another result goes against them.
Do you know what I think part of it is? And I'm sure you guys have kind of, maybe you've heard about it and felt it, but the emergence of FIFA, the video game, in the U.S. has just drastically changed how 18 to 34-year-olds consume soccer, and even younger than that, probably 12 to 34-year-olds. I mean, it is now like the sports game that people play. I mean, obviously, when I was growing up, it was Madden. NBA 2K had a long stint there, but FIFA is the game now. And I think that's why I enjoy it, because it's still like the only game that I play. And so obviously you just get promoted immediately and then get to the top three and play in the Champions League after 2 years, right? That's just easy enough with Villa. And obviously that'll happen in the next 2 seasons as well.
Of course. Last question for you, Josh. It's been great talking to you. Very appreciative of your time. You're a young man, as I say. When you're not playing FIFA, you cover a great sport. You work for a great company. You know, if they're hiring, just give us a shout. I'm just interested as to how the Great British Bakeoff entered your consciousness.
My man. God, how did it enter? I mean, I spend a lot of time alone, to be perfectly honest. I work a lot. I am definitely single. And, you know, I watch a lot of football. I really don't watch much television anymore other than live sporting events, because there's always another football game to watch. One day, I guess I was browsing Netflix and I saw this Great British Bakeoff and clicked on it. And then I probably watched like 5 episodes in a row, because I just never seen anything like. Because I grew up watching the Food Network. I love to cook, and we have a mountain house. And growing up, for a long time, it was the only place I could get the Food Network. They didn't have it in cable in Charlotte, where I was living. So whenever we would go up there, I would just watch the Food Network. And this was kind of a blast to the old Food Network. Now, whenever we watch cooking competitions in the U.S., I mean, they're pitting people against each other. It's all negative. Meanwhile, I mean, these people are witty. They are kind. You can tell that they think they failed in every single challenge. It's great. I love it. And the presentation is just fantastic. I think they tried to do a U.S. version. I never even wanted to see that because it would just ruin it for me. But I love it, Neil. And I even went back for like multiple seasons. I think I went back all the way to when it was in like standard definition, and found those just streaming online and would watch those. So it's great. I mean, it really is, I think, the premier cooking competition, baking competition, obviously. And I kind of wish, I'm very jealous y'all have it over there. It's big over there, isn't it? Like, wasn't it the biggest show for a while?
Oh, absolutely.
Is it still?
Yeah, I mean, there was, an episode where a lady took someone's flan out of a fridge and he threw it in a bin, and it was front page news. It was, this...
Really?
Yeah. And
so it's kind of like what American Idol... I know we stole Idol from y'all as well, but American Idol was for us for so long, especially for those first few years. Like when you had, I won't go through all the names, but I was a big American Idol fan too, and that says a lot about me. But I obviously no one knows about the Great British Bakeoff here, other than if you're just scrolling through Netflix, and it's on PBS here as well. But I don't think I realized how big of a deal it was over there. Like, it would just sprout conversations at the water cooler and stuff like that.
Oh, it was, you see, with like, Game of Thrones and, The Walking Dead, people don't, no spoilers, please. That's what people are like for the Bake Off. And it's like,
wow.
It's a baking show.
Can I ask you about, because I know nothing about the hosts. Like, okay, is his last name really Hollywood? It's Tom Hollywood?
Paul Hollywood.
That's his real... Paul Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
It's his real last name.
That's his real last name. Yeah, he's actually from
is
not
he just
far
a famous
from here.
baker? And is she like? And do you know the name Martha Stewart from the U.S.?
Yes.
Is she like the British version of Martha Stewart?
Without the criminal record, yeah, I think so. I think
she's much more kind.
Yes, she's just been like one of the the best, like the TV bakers of the last 30 or so, probably longer years. So. Yeah, he's actually from not far from where I live. He's from Wallasey, just over the water from Liverpool. It spawned though. There was like a whole host of shows similar to the Bake Off on a variety of weird topics. Like there was one about like gardening, and it was like
okay.
But the one that my better half enjoys watching, as I watch it now, as she's actually doing something, is the Great British Sewing Bee. And
that sounds like watching paint dry.
Yeah, that's my feeling exactly.
Tell her I said that.
Yeah, it's like watching paint dry, dear. She's shaking her head. But yeah, it's a similar idea. It's quite a simple concept. You get a watchable host, someone with a bit of personality who's obviously an expert, and people crying because they did the stitching on a cardigan wrong.
But they don't force it. They don't force it, which I love. Like you can tell in the American versions, they force it. They want conniving people with personalities first and foremost. It all comes natural, it seems like, to the Bake Off. And that's even made me kind of, and I know you probably want to end this podcast, but I know that this has made me go down the rabbit hole a little bit with other programs. I can't remember what it was called, but there was one where they had like these common tasks, and there was like 4 comedians on stage. It was like the Taskmaster.
Yes.
Yeah, I watched that for a little bit, so on and so forth. And okay, one final question: the 2 hosts, they obviously are they've got great chemistry, and there's on and on. I could go on. Were they just comedians? Were they just hosts for other things? Like, how did they sprout up as well?
They were comedians, and they've been like a comedy duo since.
Duo? Oh, so they've always been a duo.
They've always been a duo, but they didn't present anything. They just did comedy. It was just literally when the Bake Off started. They came onto that, and as you say, obviously, the Bake Off has now left the BBC and is going to Channel 4, which is one of our major channels, and they're not going with it. So that's
why not? It was a money thing.
It was I think they would have got more money with another channel, but they said it was a matter of principle, because Mary Berry isn't going as well, but Paul Hollywood is, and they didn't feel
because he loves the money. You can tell, man.
Oh, absolutely.
You can tell.
He's got to keep himself in stonewashed jeans, but yeah, it's some new hosts are on. I'm
has that one started?
It's not started yet. I think it might not be this year. I think we might have to wait till next year for it.
So is there only one per year? Like, do they tape in the summer or in the spring, and then they go in they air it in the summer?
Something like that, yeah.
Because I know that they go home each week. It's not like these other, and I'm sure you want to end this podcast, but I don't care. I'm curious because it's not like American reality shows where they air it for 4 months, but they really taped it in 30 days. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Do they, with the Bake Off, do they tape it that same week and then put it out like that week? Like what day does it air there? Because I know that they send them home, they allow them to work on their signature and all that kind of stuff. Because I perceived it to be that, the world knew who got sent home last weekend, and then they go back and then they tape it, and then so it's like a real week-to-week thing. You know what I'm saying? It's like they play the game on the weekends and then they air it. Yeah, no,
there is a gap between. There is quite a big gap between taping and airing. But it's, as you say, they're there. It's over a weekend, which is always odd because you always look. They're wearing the same clothes 2 days running, but anyway, it's over a weekend. Then they go back to their normal lives during the week, and they come back another week. As you
there have to be major leaks that come out of that, in terms of spoilers and stuff.
You would think, but I can't remember one. I think people are. People, it's so much of an institution. People aren't going to do it. People would rather leak the first lines of Star Wars: The Last Jedi, but they won't do it with Bake Off.
Sorry to go down that rabbit hole with you. I will say, I think the only way we can end this podcast is if we do a ready, set, and then bake in 2 different tones.
Oh, I think we should do that.
Ready?
So should we do it on 3?
Yep.
On 3, we'll do. Get on your marks, get set, bake.
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
On your marks,
get set, bake.
Bake.
Well, that's one off the bucket list for me. Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, at Josh Norris on Twitter. At Rotoworld, I'll be on PFT some, and please, if you're interested in playing fantasy football at all, be sure to pick up the digital copy of the Rotoworld Football Draft Guide. It's great. I mean, it's depending on all different types of leagues that you play, you can enter your scoring. It has rankings, it has tons of columns, it has rich rebar in it. Really, anything that you want, we have it. and I think it's like $12 or $20, something like that. So rather than pick up a few magazines that you read once and are out of date, pick up this, because it is constantly updating. So the Rotoworld Draft Guide, check it out. And Neil, thanks so much for your patience, man. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you.